everyone. It's a joy to be back with you for the last installments of Revelation. Today we'll be working our way through the last 11 chapters of the book, the second half of the book. And we'll be focusing on what I've called the narrative of the beast, starting in chapter 12. Now there are some pens and paper. I ran out of time getting here this afternoon, much to John Gill's distress as he was waiting for my PowerPoint, but Doug was passing them around. Thank you. Let's very briefly just review what we did in our first two messages to set the scene for this evening. In our first message, we looked at the genre of Revelation, and we saw that Revelation identifies itself as an apocalypse. And as an apocalypse, Revelation is trying to reveal reality to us. Revelation will use symbols and pictures to reveal to us what our world is really like. This doesn't mean that there's great code for us to break, but that we should look for what Revelation is trying to show us. This will be particularly important this evening. Revelation is a prophecy. This means that it's primarily designed to call us back to faithfulness to God, rather than giving us a detailed timeline of the future. And also, Revelation identifies itself as an epistle, as a letter. That means that it's a very real letter written to very real people dealing with very real problems. And so rather than jumping straight to what it means for us and our future, one of our first ports of call should be, well, what did it mean to them in their time? The context of Revelation, we spent a little bit of time on that in our first week. And we discovered that Revelation, again, I'm going to come down here occasionally, Revelation was written to Christians who were tempted to compromise their faith in light of the Roman Empire around them, in light of the kind of pressures they had. They were feeling tempted to offer the incense, say the prayer to Caesar, to change their allegiance, if only for a minute, sure, just come and say the prayer and then go back to your churches, whatever. But they were being tempted to compromise their faith because probably the second one is the most important, because it will save them from persecution, right? We won't throw you to the lions to go straight to execution, which was absolutely on the cards, but it will save you from persecution, and more than that, it may also benefit you in this life, right? You'll be able to participate in the markets a little bit more, in the trade guilds that were being established, particularly in places in Greece and Turkey, right? You'll be able to join a little bit more, and you might get a little bit more bread on the table for you and your family. And so these Christians were being tempted to compromise their faith, and Revelation's message to them in light of that historical context is that while you're here on earth, and as we'll see in these next chapters, Revelation will characterize our time on this earth in a number of different ways as 3.5 years. It'll tell us what that is in months. It'll tell us that that's 42 months. For those of you who like tallying up, 3 by 12 plus 6, 3.5 years, 42 months. And if we really get into the arithmetic here, 42 months over an average of 30 days, which is how they counted months in the ancient world, is 1,260. And so on the reading we had from Jack just a few moments ago, we heard twice that the woman in chapter 12, she flees to the wilderness. She's carried to the wilderness by the wings of the giant eagle, and she's nourished there for 1,260 days, or for 42 months, or for 3.5 years. And Revelation will time and time again characterize our time on earth with those numbers. And Revelation's message to these Christians, in light of their context, in light of the suffering and the pressure they're feeling, is, while you're on earth for 3.5 years, 42 months, 1,260 days, while you're here for what is a very short time, be faithful. Look back at Jesus' death on the cross and look forward to that final day. Look back and look forward, and while you're here, be faithful. And again, we'll just read the first sentence of Adela Yarbrough Collins' definition of apocalypse, because it's really important as we read this book that we remember that an apocalypse, or the book of Revelation, has a genre of revelatory literature with a narrative framework. And so again, this evening, we're going to be looking for that story, looking for what is the narrative, where are the characters, where is the tension, where do we need the resolution? Right? 2 weeks ago, we looked at the narrative of the scroll, and we were always conscious of how that prop was functioning, where it was, what it was doing in the story, how were the characters using it. That narrative framework is really important as we work through this book. That's just a very brief summary of the first 11 chapters, the narrative of the scroll. Right? The Son of Man is in the midst of the lampstands in chapter 1. Given that he's in their midst, and given that he knows how to shine, he is perfectly qualified to evaluate them. And so he does in chapters 2 and 3. He delivers his assessment or his evaluation of the churches, of the lampstands. How are they shining? And then in chapter 4, we get the universe in worship. Quite striking considering how the churches are going in chapters 2 and 3, I think. Right, chapters 2 and 3, we've got churches who are about to be spat out of Jesus' mouth. But chapter 4, a universe in those concentric circles of worship. How do we get from chapters 2 and 3 to chapter 4? Well, we need a plan. We need to know how to reach the world around us. Thankfully, Revelation 5 verse 1, I saw in the right hand of him seated on the throne a scroll. That scroll has the plan that we need. And so the Lamb comes, he takes it. At the end of chapter 5, chapter 6, he begins to open it. One by one, he peels off those seals. And as those seals come off, the scroll is still not open. Right? We've got to wait to get to the open scroll until they've all been opened, and then the scroll can be revealed. But unfortunately, before we do get the scroll, there's an interlude. And then there's a bunch of trumpets, like at a parade, right? There's all these delays before the scroll can actually be opened. The trumpets blow, but then thankfully the scroll comes back. It's open now, it's given to John. John takes it, he eats it, which is not exactly what we expect, but having consumed its message, he's now in the perfect position to regurgitate it for his readers, and that's exactly what he does in chapter 11. In chapter 11, we get a vision of two. Do I have a slide on what we get? No. Two witnesses who die for their faith, but in response to their testimony, the world around them repents. You see, that's how we shine like the sun. That's how we can influence others, can reach them for the sake of the gospel. It's by following the Lamb. Being faithful, even if that means we die. Even if it means we deny ourselves. Even if it means that we are last and that others are first. That's how we reach the world around us. It's not by compromise. It's not by conquest. It's by denying ourselves and following the Lamb. Because that's how he won us. Oh, I did have something on the message of the scroll. That's okay. But the big unanswered question, when we do get to that point, when we see the message of the scroll, the big problem that we have, or the big problem that I have, the final unanswered question is, who was that beast? Who was that beast? Right, Revelation 11 verse 7, here's the big moment. And when they finish their testimony, this is the two witnesses, when they finish their testimony, the beast that rises from the bottomless pit will make war on them and conquer them and kill them. And then their bodies will lie in the streets for 3.5 days, and everyone will weep and wail, and on the story goes. But who was that beast? Where did he come from? Where is he going? Is God okay with this? Is he okay with his people being killed? as long as it results in, I guess, the conversion of others? Is God okay with that being the model that goes forward? That's what I think Revelation 12 through 22, I think that's the key question that it's trying to answer. Who was that beast? Where is he going? And is God really okay with this situation? I'm going to jump down here so that I can see my slides that I have. And so if you've got a little handout there, we'll start working through that now. And so Revelation chapters 12 and 13 immediately launch into that question, who was the beast? In Revelation chapter 12, the passage that Jack read out for us before, we saw that there were 4 characters, and in chapter 13 we get 2 further characters who very easily break up into the bad guys and the good guys. In the lineup for the bad guys, we have the dragon. I guess this has sometimes been called the unholy trinity of Revelation. The dragon, the father of the unholy trinity, if you will. Then we have the beast out of the sea in Revelation 13, verse 1. We'll talk about all these in a bit more detail in a moment. And then in Revelation 13, verse 11, we have the beast out of the earth. On the good guy team, if you will, in chapter 12, we have the woman, the mother, who's in the agony of childbirth and who's about to give birth to a male son. We have her male son. He's very briefly mentioned in there, but he's a very important character. And then the third character on the good guy team, if you will, is the mother's other children, whom the dragon will decide to pursue once he can no longer get the mother because she's been protected by the earth and she's being nourished in the wilderness. Once the dragon can no longer access the mother or the mother's child, enraged, he will turn to her other children. And spend some time on each of these characters here. The mother. The mother before birth or prenatal, she's described as being clothed with the sun. She's got the moon under her feet. She's crowned with 12 stars. And she's pregnant. And it seems that the one whom she's pregnant with is the Messiah himself. Look with me there in Revelation. No, I'll have a slide on this. I always have the slides. I should stick to the slides. Here it is. It seems that she's pregnant with the Messiah herself. There it is in verse 5. Who is she pregnant with? She's pregnant with a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. This seems to be taken straight out of Psalm 2. In Psalm 2, the nations are raging around Israel. And as they're raging, they're laughing at Yahweh. And how does Yahweh respond to their derision and to their rage? Well, he installs his king on Mount Zion. And he says, today you've become my son. Today I've become your father. Psalm 2. And that son, that father who is coronated to the throne of Israel, he is said to rule the nations with an iron rod. And so this child seems to be the king of Israel. It seems to be the one who is appointed to rule not only God's nation, but all the nations, and to rule them as God's anointed and appointed Messiah. So whoever this woman is, she's the mother of the Messiah. If we wanted to get really specific, maybe we could start theorizing that it's Mary. Maybe more than Mary, it seems to maybe be the community out of which the Messiah arose. I don't think we could identify this person as Mary. I think that is not what the text would have us do either. But the community out of which the Messiah arose, God's treasured nation, God's people who were waiting and longing in agony for that Messiah to come. That seems to be who this woman might represent. But after she gives birth, she's pursued by the dragon. relentlessly pursued until she's protected by God. She takes refuge in the wilderness. The earth itself comes to her aid and swallows the river that the dragon throws after her. And she's in that wilderness for 3.5 years, or 3.5 times. You may, right? A time and times and half a time, 3.5 times, whatever that is. 42 months or 1,260 days. Again, this seems to represent, in some way, God's people. God's people, now that our Messiah has been born and has been snatched up, we find ourselves pursued. Like a temple that's being trampled by the nations, like two witnesses that are killed and left in the streets, we as God's church are pursued. And yet, even though we're trampled, even though we might be killed, we can trust in God's protection, just like this woman. The child he seems to be the Messiah. He's snatched up. At the end there of verse 5, her child was caught up to God and his throne. Even though in the previous verse, the dragon is in what has got to be the most horrifying scene for any prenatal mother. The picture is of the dragon bending down, ready to consume the child as the baby comes out. It's pictured in that grotesque kind of way, and yet the child is snatched up, caught up to God and his throne, again showing God's constant protection and provision for his people, even while we are pursued and persecuted, I guess. What about the mother's other children? Right? Then the dragon became furious with the woman. This is after the earth has come to her aid and has swallowed the river that was pouring out of the dragon's mouth. Then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring. Well, who are the rest of her offspring? Is this talking about Mary and the 3 other children that we know she had after she gave birth to Jesus, the Messiah, in the 1st century? Well, look at how this woman's offspring are described. Went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. Again, this seems to be God's people. This seems to be the church, Christians. Maybe specifically the 7 churches of Revelation, who are called to keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. Maybe these churches need to know that while they are trying to keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus, that there will be a dragon pursuing them, throwing rivers at them, trying to conquer them and make war against them, but that God protects them. Now, does that mean that they're never going to be thrown to the lions? No, not at all. But it means that even if they're trampled by the nations, even if they're killed and left in the streets for 3.5 days, like the 2 visions of chapter 11, God is there. He measures them, protects them, and he will eventually raise them up, just as he did those 2 witnesses in chapter 11. Well, what about our bad guys? The dragon. Verse 9, and the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Our text does us a great favor here in very clearly identifying who this dragon is. It's that ancient serpent. That ancient serpent from Genesis 3, the wily deceiver who tricked Eve into taking that fruit off that tree. That ancient serpent, that deceiver of the whole world, who is called the devil and Satan. It is he who makes war against us. It is he who is hell-bent on conquering us, on seeing us not, as the previous slide said, keeping the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. It is he who is fundamentally opposed to that end. The dragon doesn't work alone. You would have seen at the end of chapter 12, in the final verse there's a really strange little final description of him. In amongst all the other things that we're told about the dragon, in chapter 12, verse 7, we're told that he stands on the sand of the sea. Why would he be standing on the sand of the sea? Well, in the very next verse, chapter 13, verse 1, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea. So we've got the beast standing on the shore of the sea. In the very next verse, we've got a beast who comes out of the sea. It seems to be that the beast that rises out of the sea has been called by the dragon. They're going to be in cahoots together, as we'll see. And it seems that the dragon raised him from the deep, or summoned him, or something to that effect. And so, in light of the dragon raising this beast up, this beast causes people to worship the dragon. It exercises its authority, it blasphemes, makes war, conquers God's people for how long? For 42 months. Again, the use of this time frame seems to be to cause us to be ready. During our time on earth, our time is short, as other authors in the New Testament will tell us. 1 Peter will tell us twice that our time is short, in 1 Peter 1:8 and 1 Peter 5:12. He will tell us that our time is short. 3.5 years is how long this beast will exercise its authority, will make war and conquer us. While he is doing that, we need to be diligent to ensure that our worship is never swayed from the Lamb. The beast out of the earth, similarly, tries to direct worship. In fact, at one point, he generates an image and tries to compel people to worship it. And the beast out of the earth, again, just capturing how deceptive these beasts are, how deceptive this dragon is. This beast has 2 horns. And we're told that these horns are like the horns of a lamb. Right? There's only one. There are lots of horns in the book of Revelation. There's horns left, right, and center. We're going to get wasps that have horns. There are frogs that have horns. All the beasts have got horns. Later, we're going to read about a prostitute on the back of a beast who's going to have 10. There are horns everywhere. There's only one in Revelation who has 2 horns, and that's the Lamb. And this beast has horns like the Lamb. Maybe the idea is he's described as the one who deceives us, this beast out of the earth. Later, he won't even be called the beast anymore. His name will be changed to the false prophet. This beast out of the earth who is directing worship away from the true Lamb and towards the dragon, or towards the image of himself that he's generated, it seems that he is trying to fool us. He looks a lot like a lamb, but indeed his voice is like that of a dragon, we're told. Right? He might look like he plays the part. He might look like he's worthy of worship and adoration. But the moment you dig a little bit deeper, the moment you push beyond the surface, he's just a wolf in sheep's clothing, reverse that. Or a dragon in lamb's clothing. Many things in this world will try to convince us that they can meet our deepest needs, that they can give us what our souls desire, that if we would but get this thing, then we'll be happy, whether it be possessions or career or reputation. The truth is, the more we pursue these things, the more we look to them for the meaning and satisfaction of our lives, the more they will turn into dragons. Never meeting the needs, never filling that void, never quite getting deep enough. They might sound like a lamb, but all they have to offer is that of a dragon. Now, the big question in Revelation 13, the 666. We do need to talk about this because it is fun, and if I don't talk about it, the Q&A surely will bring it up later. What do we do about this 666? Well, there's kind of 2 options that people have kind of had over the years. The first is what's known as gematria. Now, gematria, whether you know it or not, we're actually all taught it as children. We do it in school. And it's basically this principle, that the letter A equals the number 1, the letter B equals 2, C equals 3, etc., all throughout the alphabet. Now, normally when we do it in school, my son Zeke is in year 1, and I've seen him do this. Normally when he gets to letter K, K equals 11. Right? And then 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, all the way up to 26 in the case of the English alphabet, because we've got 26 letters. Other alphabets have different numbers of letters, right? Greek's got 22, Hebrew's got 23, and so, you know, you might end up with, you might not get all the way up to 800, you might end up at 500 or something like that. But this is essentially how ancient gematria worked, particularly in the period before Arabic numerals were developed. Before Arabic numerals, you needed a way to communicate large numbers in writing and to your fellow countrymen and whatever, and so the way that you did that was by using letters. And if you wanted to talk about 1,000, then you whacked, 2 letters of whatever was the equivalent of 500 in there. Before Arabic numerals had kind of been developed, this was how people did numbers when they wanted to write them on a sign or something like that. And so throughout history, people have tried to use gematria to come up with the number 666. And they figured if we could just find the right combination of letters that gives us 666, then we'll know who the beast out of the earth is. Right? Let me read this. This is much smaller than I was hoping to, I now realize. But this is a quote from Leon Morris, who is probably Australia's, he's passed away now, sadly, but he was probably Australia's greatest biblical critic that we ever produced. He is absolutely one of our great Christian scholars in history from this nation. And Leon Morris, he wrote a commentary on Revelation in what's known as the Tyndale New Testament Commentary Series. It's a little bit dated now, it's 30-odd years past, but it's still a very fine resource. And I want to quote it for a moment on this phenomena of gematria. Leon Morris says this: "The possibilities are almost endless. In modern times, the most favored solution is Nero Caesar." Right? That Nero Caesar can equal 666. But he qualifies this. The most favored solution is Nero Caesar if the final letter be omitted to give the equivalent of the Latin spelling of the name, then the total is 616, which is the variant reading. So in our manuscripts, all the manuscripts say 666, but there's a couple of them that say 616. And Morris is saying, well, yes, you can get to 616 if you take Nero Caesar and you chop off the last letter. Let's keep reading. "But to get this result, we must use the Greek form of the Latin name transliterated into Hebrew characters and with a variant spelling at that, by which he means that the letter wow," and that's actually what the letter is called in Hebrew, right? I'm not just saying wow, right? That little letter there next to the word has is the letter wow. The letter wow has to be omitted from that which is the word for Caesar. Right? So if you take wow out of Caesar, then yeah, sure, you can get 616, but you've got to transliterate it out of Latin into Greek and then into Hebrew, and then you've got to adopt the variant number 616. This solution has its attractions, of which I'm not entirely sure what the attractions are, but sure. But no one has shown why the Hebrew version of a Latin name with an unusual spelling should be employed in a Greek writing. It is also to be borne in mind that in the ancient world, when Nero was actually a significant figure, especially considering that the Nero Redivivus myth is thought by many critics to underline this part of Revelation, this solution was apparently never put forward. So when early Christians were reading this book, they never thought it was Nero Caesar. Well, at least not in the documents that we have available to us. Maybe there's some early Christian who did think this and they wrote a commentary, but it was lost in the ages, as does sometimes happen. But in all of the existing Christian literature that we have from the early period of the church, no one ever said that it was Nero Caesar. And if you want to maintain it's Nero Caesar, you've got to do a heck of a lot of gymnastics to make it work. Right? You've got to transliterate it through 3 languages, and say it's actually a different number that was actually the number. It's a lot of work to make it equal Nero Caesar. So what do we do with it then? Oh, I didn't actually put the next bit of what Leon Morris said. That's okay. Leon Morris will go on, and he will actually endorse this interpretive approach to it, in that he will interpret the number as a symbol. The number 7 throughout Revelation and throughout early Christian history was always viewed as the perfect number. There are 7 churches, there are 7 spirits that float around God in chapter 4. The 7 is just the perfect number. There are 7 words in Genesis 1:1 when it's in Hebrew. 7 is a number we see all over the place. And this beast, who is trying to be so much like God, trying to be so much like a lamb, trying to be so much like the Messiah, and yet he always falls just a little bit short. Right? He's not 7, he's 6. His number is not 777, it's the number 666. Trying to be like God, trying to imitate the lamb, trying to have horns like the lamb, and yet every part of his imitation falls just that little bit short. Now, in some ways you might think, well, that's not a very exciting reading, but that is the most ancient reading of this text that we have. That people interpreted the number 6 as a symbol for incompletion and imperfection. Because 7 was the complete, it was the perfect number, and if someone is 6, well, it means they're incomplete, they're imperfect. And again, it just points once more to what this world will try to do. This world will try to imitate God and try to promise us satisfaction, promise us joy, promise us life, but it will never ever deliver on that promise. It will always leave us high and dry because its number is 666. It is never complete, never perfect, never able to satisfy. And within our passage, Revelation itself will try to push us away from interpreting trying to find the historical reference for these texts. When in chapter 13, verse 10, how should we respond to the description of the dragon, the description of the beast out of the sea, the description of the beast out of the earth? How should we respond? Well, here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. You see, we're not supposed to read these descriptions and then use our intellect or our creativity to work out who it refers to or who it doesn't refer to or what part of history we're dealing with here. No. We're supposed to read these descriptions and feel galvanized to hold fast to the gospel. In light of the opponents arrayed against us, in light of the dragon and the beasts who stand opposed to God and his purposes, we're supposed to feel challenged to keep the commandments of God and hold fast to the witness of the Lamb. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. The beasts are not individual figures within our world. Instead, they are our world. Our world stands opposed to God, his purposes, and his people. And it's our job to have endurance, faith, and wisdom. That's what it means to conquer in Revelation. It means to stand true. We need to keep moving here. Revelation 14. And in light of God's enemies, in light of what we've just seen in Revelation 12 and 13, the question is, well, how should we respond? We've already had a few little hints there in chapter 13, verse 10. But the call in chapter 14 is twofold. Firstly, faithfully endure. And the first portion of Revelation 14 is given over to 3 angels who declare messages to the church. And these messages are essentially messages of endure. Right? The beasts stand opposed to you, right? They are dripping in the blood of the martyrs and the blood of those who hold to the testimony of Jesus. But the call is to flee from them in the first portion of chapter 14. And so the call is to endure. Revelation 14 verse 12, here is a call for the endurance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus. But not only are we faithfully endure, we're supposed to look forward. We look to the harvest. And Revelation 14 ends with two visions. And they're both strikingly similar. There's two angels who come out from the temple. They both have sickles in their hand, and they're both ready to harvest the earth. But one of them, they harvest the earth and they collect all of the grapes, I believe, is what's being harvested at that point. And the other angel goes out and harvests and then throws them in the winepress in which they are crushed and trodden, and their blood pours forth. Right? How do we endure? How do we stand fast against these beasts? Well, we are faithful and we look to the harvest. That one day God will harvest us and collect us into his barn, and he will also harvest the wicked into his great winepress, and his judgment, his justice will pour forth. This is how we faithfully endure. We look forward to the harvest. And this is what the rest of Revelation will bear out in various ways. It's just going to spell out time and time again what this harvest will look like. And so straight away we get the bowls, Revelation verse 15. This seems to be God's response to the enemies. Did I delete that slide? That's very unhelpful. The bowls seem to be God's response to these enemies in chapters 12 and 13. We respond with faithful endurance and are looking to the harvest. How does God respond? Well, he responds by bringing that harvest in the form of the bowl judgments. Chapter 15, verse 1, there I saw another sign in heaven, great and amazing, 7 angels with 7 plagues, which are the last. For with them the wrath of God is finished. Right? These are the last plagues. This is when the wrath of God is finished. This is that great harvest at the end of days. And one of the 4 living creatures gave to the 7 angels 7 golden bowls full of the wrath of God, who lives forever and ever. The sanctuary was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power, and no one could enter the sanctuary until the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were finished. How does God respond to these enemies? He responds with judgment. 7 bowls with 7 plagues in the hands of 7 angels. We'll read through these bowls really quickly, and what I want you to see is that each of them is directed at God's enemies. Unlike the first sets of 7 that we had in Revelation 6, when we had the 7 seals, and then in Revelation 8 and 9, where we had the 7 trumpets, where the judgments we saw there were kind of just directed at anyone and anyone who was in the crosshairs. These bowl judgments are limited to God's enemies. Have a look at them with me. Revelation 16, verse 2. The first bowl is poured out upon the people who bore the mark of the beast and worshipped its image. The second bowl, verse 3, is directed, all of the ocean turns into blood, and every living thing died that was in the sea. Now you might go, well, that sounds a bit funny, Jason. Why is the sea God's enemy here? Well, we'll see that one of the final acts in Revelation 21, verse 5, before the New Jerusalem comes out of heaven, one of the final things God will do to prepare the world for the uniting of heaven and earth is he will actually get rid of the sea. Revelation 21, verse 5, the sea will be no more. Now, why does God get rid of the sea? It seems like the most strange thing. Is it that God is against biodiversity and he doesn't like sea life? He just wants, creatures on the earth? Or what's going on there? Why get rid of the sea? Well, from the very beginning of creation, the sea seems to be the place from which darkness came. Remember back in Genesis, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. That word there, deep, is the same word used throughout the Hebrew Bible for deep waters, right? For oceans, for seas. And before light is even created, before God even really kicks creation into gear, on the first day of creation, then the second, and so on and so on. Before that even happens, there's already darkness over the face of the deep. There's darkness related to the sea. Leviathan in the book of Job will come out of the sea. God's people will have terrible experiences throughout their history with the sea. They will call out that they're stuck in miry pits, that the breakers and waves are crashing over them. The sea is not normally a good place for the nation of Israel. Here at the end of Revelation, the sea will be no more. And that's a great thing, because it means the place from which darkness came, the place from which the darkness that was over the face of the deep, that's gone. I always used to wonder, and I asked my youth pastor when I was a very new Christian, could this thing ever happen again? What if we're all in the New Jerusalem, we're all having a great time, and then someone decides to go and take from the tree of life again? Right? What if we end up in the same mess all over again? Well, the good news is that the darkness that was over the face of the deep, that's gone, because actually the sea itself is gone. There's not even a place for the darkness to be anymore. There's not even a place for the enemy to emerge from. The beast in Revelation 13, where does he come from? He comes out of the sea. You know what? The sea's gone. There's not even an environment from which darkness or the beast or Leviathan to emerge from, so that we might end up in this mess all over again. And so the sea, every living thing dies in the sea. The sea in Israel's history, you have to see that the sea has always kind of been this mysterious place from which evil emerges. Anyway, the third bowl, Revelation 16, verse 6, is directed at a woman called Babylon, who has shed the blood of saints and prophets, and you have given them blood to drink. That's the description of what God has done in this plague. Number 4, they cursed the name of God, who had power over these plagues, and they did not repent or give him glory. The fifth bowl, the fifth angel poured out this bowl on the throne of the beast. It's not just directed at humanity, it's directed again to those who stand opposed to God. The sixth plague is directed at the sixth plague is very long, so I didn't bother putting in a verse. I just took a few snippets out of there. It's directed at the kings from the east, at the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet, and at those who are gathered on the hill of Armageddon. And then the final bowl, the seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple from the throne saying, "It is done." It seems that these bowls are God's response to the enemies. How are we supposed to respond to the enemies arrayed against us? Faithful endurance and looking forward to the harvest. And how does God respond? Well, he sends his judgment. He pours out his wrath upon his enemies. And Revelation is going to give us an example, an illustration, if you will, of what that looks like. Here it is, Revelation 17, verses 1 and 2. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute, who's seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose sexual morality the dwellers on earth have become drunk." Right? So one of the bowl angels who had a bowl of wrath comes forward and says, "Come, I want to show you something special, something specific that's happening while these bowls are being poured out. Come, I want to show you the judgment on the prostitute." So the question emerges, well, who's the prostitute? Revelation 17, these two chapters break up very easily. Revelation 17 describes the woman. Revelation 18 gives us her judgment. Well, who is this prostitute? Revelation 17, verse 9, we're told this calls for a mind with wisdom. Right away, you've already, that's a signal to pay attention, right? It calls for a mind of wisdom, right? You don't read that all the time, right? And so at that point, we're going, okay, right, we're going to pay attention. The 7 heads, right? This woman is seated on a beast who's got 7 heads, right? The 7 heads of the beast that she's sitting on, the 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. The city of Rome is most famously known as the city of 7 hills. This is a De Gruyter, which is got to be one of the most academic publishers in the world. I would love De Gruyter to publish my PhD. I've asked them to. I don't think they're going to, but that's a little pipeline dream of mine. But this is a book in a De Gruyter series called The 7 Hills of Rome. If you type in, this is literally what I did, the city of 7 hills, this is the description that Google will automatically pop up for you with its AI generator. It'll say Rome. One of the best known nicknames for Rome is the city of 7 hills. This is, of course, because the ancient city was built on and between 7 hills, all of which make up part of the core of the modern Italian capital. The 7 hills of Rome mark the ancient boundaries of the city. Even in the ancient world, they knew of Rome as the city on 7 hills. This is a coin from the time of Vespasian, who was emperor between the years 86 and 92 Anno Domini. That is probably about within 10 years of when Revelation was actually written, when Vespasian was emperor. This is a coin that he minted. And here you can see at the bottom, it actually says Roma, right? The great goddess Roma, who founded the nation and helped Romulus and Remus through the wilderness and helped them follow the wolves to the great oasis that became Rome. This is that great goddess Roma, seated. See the hills over here that she's reclining upon? In her hand, her scepter. Here, the grapes that she will use to produce the wine that she drinks. This is how the ancient world thought of Rome, in the language of Roma, the great goddess sitting on the mountains. Revelation 17, 3 and 4, I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names. It had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet. Look at Roma's resplendent robe of purple and scarlet. She was adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. The woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. And in the first century world, the city that had dominion over the kings of the earth was none other than the capital of the Roman Empire, Rome. Rome, of course, the great empire that is attempting to corrupt the Christians to worship, to offer the incense, say the prayer to Caesar. The question that the churches might have had at the end of Revelation 15 and 16, okay, so if God, my apologies, if God is going to judge the enemies, if God is going to judge those characters from Revelation 12 and 13, does that include Rome? Is God going to take care of Rome for us? And the answer in chapter 18 is yes. Because in Revelation 17 and 18, we get kind of a worked example, an illustration of what God's judgment looks like. It includes Rome. God's wrath is poured out on Rome, who is described as Babylon the Great. Rome is probably described as Babylon the Great here, and there's a long history of calling Rome Babylon. We even see it in something like 1 Peter 5. Polycarp, who was an early Christian writer, he describes Rome as Babylon, as does Ignatius in his letters. The reason why Rome might be called Babylon at this point is that Babylon is infamous in the Old Testament as the nation that tried to lead Israel astray into idolatry. While they were away in Babylon on their exile for 70 years, they continually were presenting their idols to Israel. Get involved in our community. We know you think you're only here for 70 years, but get involved. Come to the temple. Come to the temple prostitutes. Come and make use of our facilities. And in light of how Babylon kind of conducted herself during that exile, Babylon almost became a cipher, really, for other people who try to lead you astray and bring you to idolatry and try to convince you to walk away from God. And so Babylon is described as, Rome is described as Babylon the Great. Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, 18 verse 2. 3 times in the chapter we hear, alas, alas, you great city. God has poured out on you the judgments that you deserve. Sticking out in Revelation 18 is verses 4 and 5. Whereas most of the chapter is a lament for God's judgment on Babylon, verses 4 and 5 stick out a little bit. They read, come out of her, my people. Right? So this is not talking about Babylon anymore. This is God talking to his people. God talking to the 7 churches. God talking to us. And he says that we need to come out of Babylon. There's a sense in which we live in a Babylon, a world that would have us be deceived away from our first love. A world that would lead us further and further away from Christ and further into the worship of things and sex and reputation. And Revelation calls us in 18 verse 4, come out of her, my people. This is something we actively need to do. We need to separate ourselves from the world around us. And that doesn't mean that we flee and that we are no longer in the world, but we need to unentwine our lives in such a way that we are no longer taking part in her sins, right? Come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins. Because if we take part in her sins, what will the result be? Look at the next line. Lest you share in her plagues. If we do not come out of Babylon, if we do not see this world for the wicked place that it is, the place that is arrayed against God and his purposes, if we do not recognize it as such, we will become further and further entangled within it. And as we become entangled within it, we will more and more take part in the sins of our age. And the more and more we take part in the sins of our age, the more and more God's wrath, the plagues, the bowls will be not just directed to God's enemies, but directed to me. Come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins and lest you share in her plagues. For her sins are heaped high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. This is the call of Revelation, to come out of Babylon, to lead pure, godly lives. And thus the story seems to end. Revelation 19, we seem to be at the end because we get a chorus of hallelujahs in verse 1, verse 3, and verse 6. We then get a rider on a white horse. We get an invitation to the great marriage supper of the Lamb. This seems to be the conclusion of our story. In chapter 20, verses 11 to 15, we will seem to have the final judgment. It's really the millennium in the middle, which again seems to sort of be the end, but almost not, because the millennium sticks out for one important reason, in that it ends. It's kind of what makes the millennium so strange in many regards. There was a guy at college who did a project, a master's project, and the title of his project was, "Why Does the Millennium End?" Which I thought was a very appropriate question. And his research basically, he didn't really come to an answer, which is very typical of biblical scholars. He really just showed how problematic the end of it was, and how the whole millennium seems so confusing anyway. All of the enemies that we get described in the middle verses, in verses 3 to 7, are historically so anachronistic. There are enemies from the nation of Babylon, enemies from the nation of Persia, enemies from the Greek period as well, who were all gathering together, apparently, at Armageddon to make war against God, a battle that never actually happens because God just slams his fist and it's all over. The whole thing seems ridiculous to have all these nations who could have never lived at the same time gathered together in a battle that never actually happens in the first place. And Peter Judge Mears, this guy who wrote this research, the solution that he kind of raised, he didn't fix all the problems, but the solution that he put forward was the reason the millennium ends is so that God can show just how committed he is to ending everything. Right? It's a battle that never even happens against enemies who could never possibly ever be together. The reason the millennium ends, at least according to Peter Judge Mears, is so that God can demonstrate his great commitment to ending all things for the benefit of his people. And so what do we get straight after that? We get the final judgment where death and Hades themselves, in chapter 20, verse 14, are thrown into the lake of fire. And in those passages, we get all of our great enemies thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur. In chapter 19, verse 20, the two beasts. Chapter 20, verse 10, the dragon. And chapter 20, verse 14, death and Hades themselves thrown away so that we no longer need to suffer under the cruel hand of death anymore. And thus we get the final scene of Revelation, the New Jerusalem. Revelation 21:1, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, the sea was no more. Right there it is, the sea is no more. What's God's problem with the sea? Well, the sea is that historic place from which darkness came from which the beast came from which Leviathan came from, and now that can't happen anymore. I find so much comfort in the fact that God is committed to getting rid of the sea. Not because I don't like it. It's got nothing to do with that. But it can never happen again. And I saw the holy city, verse 2, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And have a look at all the 12s we get in this New Jerusalem. It's a bit disconcerting, really, how many 12s there are. This city has 12 gates, 12 angels, all 12 of the tribes are gathered there. Under the wall there are 12 foundations, and on each of the foundations are the 12 names of the 12 apostles. The walls of the city are 12,000 stadia long. The height of the wall is 144 cubits. On each of the foundations is 12 precious stones, your carnelians, your jaspers, etc., etc. And on those 12 gates, each of those 12 gates is a pearl, which gives us 12 pearls. And on the tree of life in chapter 22, in the first 5 verses, we're told that there are 12 fruit that are produced every month. There's a lot of 12s. What's going on with all the 12s? Well, 12 has always been the number of God's people. There were 12 sons of Jacob, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 apostles. Earlier in Revelation, we had 12 times 12, 144,000 followers of the Lamb. The number 12 has always represented not just a portion of God's people, especially not just a remnant. 12 has always represented God's people as a whole, as a collective. 12 tribes around the Mount of Zion. And so in this city, who is this city for? It's the city for God's people. The number 12 is literally written all over it. And that tells us that this is a city for each and every one of us. For each and every one of us who believes in Jesus, who holds to his testimony, who has turned our back on the joys that this world offers us and has turned to Jesus for the joys that he can offer us, this is the city for us. This is the city we look forward to. This is the place that we call home, not this world and its twisted and warped sense of judgment and justice and truth. This is the city we look forward to because it is the city for all of God's people, because the number 12 is written all over it. A couple more things. We'll just talk about a couple of things in this city really quickly before we close. This city, while it is a city for God's people, the description of this city should be one that drives us to invite others in. Okay, look at how it's described. By its light will the nations walk. This is not just a city for us, it's a city that is open to the nations, and so we need to invite them in. This is a city they can participate in if they would turn their back on this world and partner with Jesus. By its light will the nations walk. The kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. Its gates will never be shut by day. There will be no night there. They, who is the they? Well, it's the kings, it's the nations. They will bring into it the glory and the honor of the nations. The tree of life in chapter 22, the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. This is a city that we need to be committed to inviting other people to come and participate in. By its light, they can walk. By it, they can receive honor. And by it, they can be healed of the brokenness of this age. But lest we think that that somehow means that this city is open for everyone, that anyone can come in, no matter what part of the nations you're from, lest we think that, there are some who are outside the city. As for the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, for murderers, the sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, all liars, their portion will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death, 21:8. Nothing unclean will ever enter it, nor anyone who does what is detestable or false. Only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. Outside are the dogs and sorcerers, the sexually immoral, and murderers and idolaters, and everyone who loves and practices falsehood. 21:27 is the key here, my friends. This city is a city for the nations. It's a city for all of God's people. It's not a city in which evil can enter. And so how can anyone enter it? It's through the Lamb's book of life. Having our names written in the Lamb's book of life is the only way in which any of us can participate in this city, because all of us in some way are guilty of the things listed here. Being unclean, being false, sexually immoral, idolatry, practicing falsehood, loving evil. In some way, we are all guilty of these things. And so how is it that any one of us can participate in the life of this city? It's through the Lamb's book of life. Jesus came. He lived the life that we never could. He died the death that we should have died. He rose to give us the life that we so desperately needed. And now through him, through the cross, we get to participate in the life of this city. Let's pray. Lord God and Heavenly Father, thank you for your kindness in writing our names in your book of life. We could never put our names there ourselves. You put our names there. You pulled each of us out of the depths of our brokenness, and you saved us. And Father, I pray that while we live in this twisted and broken world, that you would give us faithfulness, that we would follow the Lamb, that we would hold his testimony. We would deny ourselves and put others first. And that while we are faithfully enduring, that we would also look forward to that great day when we will be gathered together, one with another, all of us at unity with you, in whose name we pray.